Hi, in my previous recording, I demonstrated how easy it is to get started with Extreme Scale Liberty Deployment, or XSLD, a new feature of Extreme Scale version 8.6.1. In that demonstration, we used Installation Manager to install XSLD, automatically deploy and provision a cache member group, created the first cache member, and then we used the administrative console that you're looking at now to create a data grid. And then finally we used a Java client to interact with the grid, where we added or inserted data into the grid and then verified we could read that data back out of the grid. In this demonstration, I want to show you how easy it is to horizontally scale the the cache member group by adding capacity to it, by adding another node. So what I've done is I've got another node on VM2 where I've also installed Extreme Scale Liberty Edition. So the installation is just done, and I can launch the administrative console like I did before. And from the administrative console, I can then see that I also have one data cache member available to me. Now, this member is not included or joined into the existing cache member group. As such, there's no data grids displayed, just the single cache member that got created through the installation. In order to join this member to an existing member in a cache data group, we can use the administrative console and select the action to join this member to the group. It's a simple task of just pointing to the IP address or host name of the cache member group that we want to join to, in this case on VM1, and providing the secret key that we created when we installed. And remember, we need the secret key to do the administrative activities like joining cache members to cache member groups or disjoining them. The default behavior for adding a new member to the group is to also install a catalog server along with the container servers. In this case, I want to override the default configuration and not run a catalog server on this member, just run the container servers. In other words, I just want to horizontally scale the capacity by adding another 4 gig of memory to the cache group and not run another catalog server. So we simply hit the join button and wait a couple of minutes for the member to join to the existing cache member group. Okay, so after a couple of minutes, you'll notice that now my second cache member has been added to the group, and this cache member has an additional 4 gigabytes of capacity that I can now use for my data grids. Right? So what I want to do now is I want to go back to the other member. Alright, back in the virtual machine 1, you'll notice that now I have 2 cache members as part of my cache data, my caching member group. I've got the VM2 and the VM1 both having 4 gigabytes of capacity. So I've then doubled the size of my capacity available to me for my grids. What I want to do now is I want to show you some of the operational and administrative REST APIs that you can use to work with the grid and manage your configuration of the cache member group, security, and etc. So the first simple thing I want to do is just show you using some of the CRUD operations of the operational API to insert or retrieve data from the grid using the Explorer tool. So I just need to pass in the grid name and the map name as parameters, and inserting a key, just give it some kind of a key name, and the value be simply Kevin. And then from the Explorer, hit the tryout button. And if I've entered that information correctly, I'll get a response code of 200 indicating that my command was successful. Once I've inserted something into the grid, I can then use the get operation to retrieve that key from the grid, thereby passing in the grid name, the map name, and the key that I want to retrieve from the grid. And a response code of 200 indicates that it's successful, and I return the value of Kevin. So those are some of the simple operational APIs that you could use to interact with the grid, but there's a lot of APIs available to administer the grid. So working with cache member groups, working with the grid, using security, LDAP, logging. In fact, all of the administrative activities that you can do in XSLD are available to you via the REST commands. It should be noted that the administrative console, the UI that we use, simply invokes the REST APIs under the covers and renders the information to the display. So let's take a look at a couple of things from the administrative interface. One is from the cache member group, for example. Let's look at cache member group, and we'll be able to see, for example, list the members that are part of the group. There's an API to get the members that are part of my group and the information associated with it. So I pass in my cache member group name. And it returns the information about my cache members. So in this case, I have 2 cache members in the group. My VM1, it's online, it's got 4 gig of capacity. And if I scroll down, you'll see that it's got the second member, which is on VM2, also online with 4 gigabytes of capacity. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other administrative APIs that are available to us. For example, I might want to get information about the versions of software that's in use in XSLD. So I click the versioning API, and it'll return to me the version information of the WebSphere Liberty server that's running, as well as the versioning information for XtremeScale itself and the version of Java, all available to us. Another interesting API that we could use is the XS command utility. Most of you are familiar with XtremeScale. You can log into the command line in XtremeScale and run the XS commands to show map sizes and do all kinds of administrative and monitoring kinds of capabilities. Here we allow you to run that command from the REST API, and you don't have to pass in nearly as many parameters because XSLD kind of works all that out for you in terms of IDs, credentials, and all the parameters that you need to run to invoke the command. It's also secure, right? The REST API, administrative APIs is requiring administrative privileges to be able to run, and as such, we are secure in that manner. And you would get exactly what you'd expect from the XS command, right? So looking at the map sizes, you'd see the amount of memory and number of entries in each of the partitions in a map. So a lot of things you can do with the cache member group. Let's take a look at some of the APIs available to us for managing the grid itself. We only have one grid available, but for example, we could go in and just use the get command and list all the grids that are available to us in XSLD at the moment. So hitting the try it out button right quick, we get a response back indicating that we have one grid, which is the test grid 1, information about the owner and the port information, as well as the content of the deployment XML and the object grid XML, right? So what are some of the other things we can do with the grid operations? Well, you can create grids, modify them, remove grids, all these kinds of things are available to us from the REST API, and many of these you can do from the admin console. So I think I said it before, but the REST APIs are full capabilities for administering the XSLD, and the administrative user interface then invokes these APIs under the covers and renders that information to the screen. Alright, so I think that's about all the time I have for the moment. I thank you for your attention. So hopefully in this demonstration you've been able to see how easy it is to take XSLD and horizontally expand the grid, the capacity of your member group by adding a second node to the group. And we do that in such a way that we don't even lose any grid data. So you notice that the grid we have is still available, the content was still in the grid, and we use some of the REST APIs to be able to work with the grid, see content in the grid, and administer the cache member group and the grid itself. All right, thank you for your attention.